The Miata is everyone's favorite sports car. Just look at that adorable little smile. Well, that smile didn't just appear at the Chicago Auto Show in 1989. It was the work of hundreds of people on opposite sides of the world working against each other, together, that made the Miata the Miata. Bob Hall, a notable contributor to Motor Trend, was what you might call a bit of a gearhead. Bob's father was an airman during World War I, where he discovered his love of British sports cars. So naturally, the Hall boys took on their father's passion for MGs, Triumphs, and the like. Cut to Hiroshima, Japan, 1979. Bob Hall enters the office of a Kenichi Yamamoto, managing director of Mazda Global. The two openly conversed, and eventually the conversation turned to one particular question. What kind of cars should Mazda build? Hall spots the nearest blackboard in the room and excitedly makes his way to it. Chalk dust fill the room as Hall's untrained hand flies across the board. He describes to Yamamoto as he draws a low-price, open-bodied sports car. When the dust and childlike excitement settled, the first sketch of what would over the next decade become the MX-5 was revealed. It's hard to believe that this angular, almost cartoonish-looking drawing would become the round, bubbly Miata that we all know, but it's arguably one of the more tame concepts that would appear. After making it through the oil crisis of the 1970s by mass-producing thousands of boring econoboxes like the 323, Michinori Yamaguchi, managing director of Mazda Product Planning and Development, is weary of what lies ahead for the company. Yamaguchi is concerned that the higher-ups, as well as his designers, have fallen for the reliability and consistency of making boxy, bare minimum cars. Yamaguchi wanted a new, exciting Mazda. You might be thinking, but Mazda already had a cool car, the RX-7. And you'd be right. But see, the issue is, over the years, the RX-7 had gotten fatter. It'd gotten bigger, heavier, and more luxurious. Just like me. So much so that it could no longer be considered a lightweight, affordable sports car. So that's where the Miata comes in. Its job was to fill in the shoes that the RX-7 had outgrown. To achieve his vision, Yamaguchi launched Offline Go-Go in November of 1983. An off-the-books operation dedicated to experimenting with new ideas for the cars of Mazda's future. Some of the most talented designers at Mazda are on board, who decide on two main ideas. One, an off-road Ariel Atom-esque kit car design, and two, a lightweight sports car, or LWS. Didn't take long for option 2 to be the one that was selected, and the project was christened P729. Then P729 was handed off to Masakatsu Kato, the new project director. He would be in charge of everything to do with the car and the project. This phase saw some wild ideas hitting the board. There were concept drawings of a mid-engine layout, more on that later, a front-wheel drive coupe, and even a three-wheeler. It was during this time that Mazda Corporate began experimenting with different company structures. Yamaguchi decided that development of P729 would be based on two teams, one in Irvine, California, and one in Hiroshima, Japan. The two would compete for the better design, theoretically fueling progress. In November of 1984, the idea of an affordable, lightweight sports car made its way across the Pacific to California, where a man named Mark Jordan lost his mind. Mark's the son of Charles Jordan, a bigwig executive at GM who had managed to get his son a job at MANA. When Mark received the LWS proposal from corporate, it was all hands on deck, and concept sketches of P729 began taking shape in the States. Meanwhile, in a 20 by 8 foot studio in a rough Tokyo neighborhood, Yoichi Sato, head of design at Mazda Japan, was also working on concept sketches for P729. Their rivalry had begun. Upon arrival at his new office, chief designer at MANA, Tom Mantano, is not happy. Mantano had been reassigned to MANA from his position at Mazda Japan, where nearly any resources he could imagine were readily available. This was not the case at the newly formed MANA division. In fact, they didn't even have modeling clay, which is like their entire purpose of existence. Using his corporate dark magic and expendable Mazda Global checkbook, Mantano secured clay and all the other proper equipment for an automotive design studio. This meant that P729 was the first project to be sculpted in-house at MANA. The Miata was the first thing they made. MANA makes the removable top a must-have for multiple reasons. First off, the most comparable car in America to the LWS, the Corvette, sold 7 times more coupe models than convertibles in 1975. Seeing numbers like those, Detroit swayed away from making convertibles and more towards closed-roof cars. That meant the demand for convertibles spiked. Along with this, the Miata crew predicted that employment in the Sun Belt states, a group of 15 temperate climate regions in the southern U.S., would spike in population by 28% between 1979 and 1990. Boy, were they right. Since its release, the MX-5 has been the best-selling roadster of all time. Similarly, Doritos have been the best-selling chip of all time since they discovered there would be a spike in the population of artificial cheese-craving 13-year-olds between 2007 and 2008. Across the pond, Sato and his Tokyo team settled on a mid-engine design, as no one had produced an affordable mid-engine sports car at the time. Little did they know, Toyota had already beaten them to the punch with their MR2, which was much further down the line of development. Fortunately for performance nerds all over the world, the mid-engine layout continues to lurk in the background of the MX-5, much like it did in the Corvette for so many years. Unlike the mid-engine Corvette, though, a mid-engine MX-5 sort of debuted in 1992 as the AUTOZAM AZ1. See, at the same time as the MX-5's development, Mazda was looking to re-enter the K segment. K cars are tiny automobiles built within size limits made by the Japanese government. Owning one could get you benefits such as tax breaks, making them a hot commodity for consumers. P729 was almost a K car, but thanks to Yamaguchi, Mazda's K entry was separated from P729 and co-developed with Suzuki. If you've never heard of the AUTOZAM AZ1, go check it out. I'll put a video in the description. In April of 1984, both teams met for the first time in Hiroshima. In the words of Jack Yamaguchi, author of the book this presentation heavily relies on, Sato came, saw, and thought he had conquered. Funny enough, that's exactly what I said when I brought that paintball gun to a laser tag arena. Sato would go on to say that Miata's Roadster was neat and clean, but not really animated, and even that he felt sorry for Mark Jordan, who apparently was also aware his designs were not superior. Corporate saw both teams work and ordered them to return to their studios, make clay models out of their sketches, and meet for final judgment to determine the production layout. Front-engine rear drive or mid-engine rear drive, in 4 months' time. 4 months later, in August 1984, Miata and Sato's team met with Mazda corporate in Tokyo. The tables had turned. Evidently, Mark Jordan took his learnings from the Hiroshima meeting back home, and Miata was back in the game. After one hell of a marketing pitch, Miata and their FR layout had won the hearts and minds of Yamaguchi and his bean counters. Despite being blown clear out of the water, this was after all a passion project for everyone involved. Sato and his team were, quote, overjoyed by the judge panel's choice. So let's bring some attention to the work of a Masaki Watanabe, unrelated to the RS Watanabe Wheel Company. Watanabe was the layout manager for the Tokyo team, essentially the engineering counterpart to the design team. According to him, at one point, his team put together a running mid-engine prototype car. Did I read that right? His team at one point put together a running mid-engine prototype car with ball joint suspension on a Mazda 323 platform. In his account of the experimental car, Watanabe emits a proud and excited tone. But he was obviously upset when his concepts didn't make it past noise and vibration and were ultimately given the axe. After the Judgment Day meeting in Tokyo, corporate approved the FR layout for further development, and teams once again went their separate ways. This time, they were both aiming to build a front-engine rear-wheel drive car. Being the industry in-man that he was, Manteno and the North America studio had some connections. Tom reached out to an accomplice at IAD, an engineering company in England, and subsequently contracted them to build the working model of Miata's concept. It's at this time that the entire P729 project was transferred from offline GoGo to Mazda's new Technical Research Center. Here, Sato and his engineers would utilize the TRC's futuristic accommodations to study the feasibility of plastic body panels on their car. It's November of 1984. Both teams have subcontracted their design concepts to be built by other companies, and now they have a room full of bright-eyed designers with nothing to do for 8 months. Let's check in with our friend Watanabe. I wonder what he's doing with all this time and a huge studio with all the tools he would ever need. What's What's that? He's building a 4-wheel drive, 3-rotor prototype car with 4-wheel steering. After anxious months of waiting, it's September 1985, 9 years after the conception of Mazda's LWS, and IAD's first running concept, christened V705, is complete. Kato, Jordan, and a slew of other Mazda men flew to the United Kingdom to see the car with their own eyes. After an exciting day of standing around looking at the thing like a bunch of dads observing a new deck, they finally got to see what their car could do. The car was pushed to its limits on the British Ministry of Defence's proving grounds, where it was compared to a Fiat X1/9 and a Toyota MR2, two of the cars that the car was expected to be fighting with. One of the aforementioned Mazda men present for the trip was Masaka Matsui, head of the Technical Research Center. Upon the closing of the trip to England, V705 was to be shipped back to Japan immediately. However, Matsui had some other plans. He says, quote, "A car is only worthy in its natural environment, public roads and streets. The P729 was conceived with America as its main target marketplace, and its styling was conceived and executed in America. The prototype should be viewed in America at least one day on the public road." It's at that point that V705 was destined not for Tokyo, but for Santa Barbara, California. As one would imagine may result from giving a bunch of car enthusiasts the key to a prototype sports car and a full day in sunny California, some great stories were about to be made. On a warm October day in 1985, a first-generation RX-7, a Triumph Spitfire, and a convertible Honda CRX all hit the road with the one-of-one V705 prototype. This would never happen today. These guys basically just Ferris Buellered their way into driving a prototype roadster in public. And I mean, this thing is not wrapped up in camouflage or being escorted by a bunch of black Suburbans like prototypes are now. That meant that spy shots being leaked to the press were a serious concern for these guys. When a Mana employee driving the car spotted a photographer trying to snap a picture in a parking lot, he accelerated the car towards him, causing the photographer to jump into a bush for cover. Bob Hall was also along for the trip, somehow, when he recognized a couple of automotive journalists at a table across the street. Allegedly, Hall approached them and said, "You published a single photo, and that will be the end of this honorable project that may one day grace your pages." The best part of all of this is that Matsui isn't even concerned about this at all. He's just having a great time. In December of 1985, Mana completed their second full-size clay model, presumably with some minor improvements based on what they learned in Santa Barbara. In the next month, January of 1986, production feasibility studies began and the Mazda LWS was pitched to the big boss, Yamamoto, who approved. As things start happening faster, the changes become a little bit difficult to follow, so pay attention. 1986 was a turbulent time for P729. Kato left the project for a position at the TRC, and Yamaguchi replaced him with Toshihiko Hirai. Hirai is the guy that was responsible for the 323, which was a wild success for Mazda. Along with Hirai came Kazuyuki Mitate and Hideaki Tanaka, two key product planners for the P729's development into production readiness. Following the onboarding of Hirai, IAD was contracted to build more M cars. These would be used as test mules for P729's development. One of said M cars was an FBRX-7 powered by the i4 engine that was to be placed in the production MX-5. This practice of putting engines in cars they don't belong in for powertrain development is actually pretty common even today. Perhaps the wildest of these engine test cars ever made was done by the BMW M division during their development of the McLaren F1 motor. Engineer Paul Roche wedged the 618 horsepower V12 for the F1 supercar into a BMW E34 wagon. In an interview with Chris Harris of Top Gear, Roche says the car still belongs to BMW and is locked away somewhere in a warehouse. In March of 1986, Mana began their third clay model. You gotta remember that each time they're making a clay model, they're making some small adjustments and improvements, so it's not like they're just making the same thing over and over again all these times. The third model is where the design took on its signature bar of soap shape. Designers Mark Jordan and Wu Huang Qin introduced the gentle oval shape to the car, and the Miata as we know it took form. Meanwhile, at Mazda Japan, Watanabe and his crew had just completed the first set of engineering drawings. These drawings determine design hardpoints like the wheelbase, as well as where the fuel tank will go and how big it can be. The drawings also realized some of P729's keystone features, like McPherson's struts and its double wishbone suspension. Everyone knew they just couldn't cut corners with this one, and that the MX-5 would have to be developed on its own all-new chassis. As you know, the production MX-5 was never equipped with Mazda's iconic rotary engine, but why? The short answer is best worded by Jack Yamaguchi. Quote, "The rotary as developed by Mazda was best suited to high-powered, well-equipped sports cars and specialty models. In other words, the MX-5 was a very lightweight car, and a rotary may have produced more torque than the car would handle without major reinforcements, which would increase its weight and cost." In spring of 1986, the competition between MANA and Mazda Japan was over. Members from both teams were regularly flying between the US and Japan, cooperating with each other as one team to get P729 to production status. By summer, the job was done and the teams handed the reins to Mazda Global for final refinements and assembly. MANA reluctantly sent their third full-size clay model to Japan. I mean, they should be excited, right? This project they've been working on for years is about to become a reality. The designers at MANA were afraid the production model would be a far cry from their designs, nullified and snuffed by Mazda's higher-ups. Lucky for them, the concept was in good hands. Enter Shunji Tanaka, senior designer at Mazda Global. His job is to streamline the whole model and make the styling of the car production ready. Tanaka was not a cold, numbers-driven man, as the MANA designers had feared. Actually, he was quite the contrary. Praised for his detailed artwork and craftsmanship, Tanaka was so dedicated to beauty at all costs that he fought Hirai, who was a numbers-driven man, to shorten the wheelbase of the entire car by 13 millimeters, purely for aesthetics. Tanaka also moved the battery to the trunk and shaved 35 millimeters off the hood. He's often quoted saying that the model he received was a fat pig. If that's so, he certainly turned that fat pig into an ultra-streamlined bullet racing pig. Before the year was out, Tanaka's work was done and the new and improved model was sent back to Irvine. The next day, his office received a single-sheet fax from MANA. All it read, "Congratulations." The final design had the approval of everyone under Hirai's leadership, and P729 was off to the assembly line. The Mazda MX-5 Miata, as it's known in the US, debuted at the 1989 Chicago Auto Show along other 1990s icons like the Acura NSX and the Dodge Viper. If not for the public excitement around these more exotic cars, I think the Miata would have attracted much more attention. But then, attracting attention was never what this car was about. It was meant to be a pure driving experience. Just you in the car, Jinbai Itai. Rider and horse, one. Chapter 1. The car. The MX-5 was developed with a special mindset from the beginning, Jinbai Itai. In Japanese, the phrase signifies the relationship between a horse and its rider, two separate organisms operating as one. As such, many engineering decisions on the car were made to provide the driver with the best connection to the car and the road beneath. One of the Miata's key features to this day is its open top. The open-air experience provided by the Roadster connects passengers to the outside and allows them to hear the car communicating its stresses. This open-top design also helped engineers leverage their insistence on building a whole new chassis for the car. A vehicle's roof provides vital structural rigidity. Removing it requires other parts of the load-bearing structure to be beefed up in order to support the forces being exerted on them, without a roof being there to bear some of that load. The Miata was built on a PPF, short for power plant frame. This is a long, sturdy, aluminum frame that bridges the engine, transmission, and differential. The PPF provides more than performance benefits. It connects every tactile part of the car that the driver interacts with to the engine, the suspension, and the rear wheels. This provides optimal translation of the forces at play on the car to the driver's senses. Speaking of tactile, the transmission is a very important element in any sports car. Several Mana layout engineers say they had long conversations about just how it should feel. P729 engineers in Japan knew that a short throw was essential. Hence, the distance from neutral to any slot on the NA Miata's gear selector is under 2 inches. Down below the shift knob, you'll find gear ratios optimized from those of 10 diverse and prized sports cars of the time. The result is often praised as the best shifting experience on the market. Connecting the engine to the Miata's modified RX-7 transmission is a center-balanced flywheel designed to reduce inertia and facilitate higher RPMs. Being a sports car, P729 was designed with performance as its first and foremost priority. If you've ever sat in an NA Miata, you know what I mean. Hirai had 2 practices in mind to achieve this. Make the car as light and as balanced as possible, and place that weight as low and as centered as possible. The production MX-5 had a near-perfect 52 to 48 weight distribution, and sits at a mere 48 inches tall. That's only 4 inches shorter than the world's tallest dog, and 8 inches taller than a Ford GT40, which if you've ever stood next to one, which I have, not to brag, is a very, very short car. Not only is the weight placed low, it's also focused towards the center of the car to create a lower polar moment of inertia. Mazda is very proud of the techniques it used to cut weight off the Miata. From the factory, the Miata uses a special battery that weighs an estimated 10 pounds less than comparable lead-acid batteries of the time. Along with this, the car utilizes blow-molded plastic bumper reinforcements, which save 18 pounds of weight over steel ones. Changing a vehicle's suspension can completely change its behavior on the road. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of adding horsepower and forget the automotive ultimatum: stopping. The Miata uses 4 disc brakes connected by famously tough brake lines and boosted by a small vacuum servo. These parts combine to produce a, quote, feel that is natural and proportionate to the driver's command and effort. The 1990 Mazda MX-5 was sold in North America as the Miata. It was equipped with the B6 engine, a 1.6-liter inline-4, good for 116 brake horsepower and 100 pound-feet of torque. The dual overhead camshaft motor was sourced from performance trims of the 323. However, the B6 was only the base, which would be extensively modified into the B6ZE. The combustion chambers slant away from the crown of the pistons to a point where the spark plug is mounted. The 16 valves are mounted at 50 degrees with 4 valves per cylinder, and timing is at an overlap for high RPM. Cast iron is an extremely strong material that's been used in legendary engines such as Toyota's JZ series and Mitsubishi's 4G63. That's what makes them so tunable. They can take more boost than your mom doing a P90X marathon. Mazda 2 realized the potential of using cast iron in their engines and equipped the B6ZE with a cast iron block and crankshaft. No engine with such capacity for modification should be allowed to run hot. That's why Mazda integrated a water-cooled oil cooler to extend engine life and increase high-temperature performance, like a semi-truck. Chapter 2. The Community. The Mazda Miata is a favorite among car enthusiasts and sane people alike. It's made appearances in pop culture within video games like Gran Turismo and Forza, TV shows like The Simpsons, and who could forget that uncomfortable scene in Cars where 2 Mazda Miatas named Mia and Tia flash Lightning McQueen. The MX-5 has worked its way into the hearts of many different people, all with different interests. The result? A diverse and creative community of enthusiasts and average consumers alike. When it comes to Miatas, you've just never seen it all. There's K-swap Miatas, LS Miatas, V12 Miatas, Drift Miatas, Off-Road Miatas, Show Car Miatas, Street Car Miatas. There's so many Miatas.